Welcome everyone, I'm really glad to see you out there. Education is largely, as I'm sure you all know, a state's issue. So when we talk about it, I'm really happy to see state legislators because education and healthcare are the number 1 and 2 things that are on nearly every state's budget that they handle. So as such, education is not only pushed by the growing costs in healthcare, but it also is extremely important to the number 1 priority you hear from all of your constituents: jobs, 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 and getting kids into the workforce and being productive citizens. So here at Heartland, we like to spread a lot of the ideas that help you do your job well and help you benefit your budgets, benefit your constituents, benefit your states by, as John said, not just kind of improving or tinkering with the edges of education, but doing massive whole-scale changes to jumpstart the U.S. education system into the world economy. By every measure, the United States, on average, is really mediocre in education, and there are all these, statistics and whatnot that can prove it. But we really we've lost our stance as the leader in the world, and that is likely to set us up for some trouble in the years ahead. So instead of being a downer, as I know there's a lot of sad political news, what we want to do is talk about there are a lot of really positive things that are happening among the states with education, and a lot of really great ideas for making some shifts, and they are also actually money savers. My panel is assembled to help us discuss that with you today. And I'll just first introduce them, and then I have a couple of questions, and we'll kind of take a little chance to discuss some of these ideas among ourselves, and then we'll open it up for a great amount of Q&A from you, just the way that the rest of the panels have worked. So first to my left is Representative Sid Miller. He's from Texas. He's a Texas state representative from Stephenville. He's a former teacher and school board member. He's a founding member of the Legislative Tea Party Caucus and sponsor of Texas Taxpayer Savings Grants. That's a big idea that I hope we'll spend some time on during this panel. To my second left is Bruno Baron. He's the Executive Director of For the Good of Illinois and a Heartland Policy Advisor in Education. His specialties are structural education reforms and the parent trigger, which also I hope we'll spend some time talking about. And then finally, we have Scott Jensen, who is the senior strategist for school choice advancement at our Heartland partner and friend, the American Federation for Children. He's also a former Speaker of the Wisconsin Assembly and a former Chief of Staff to Wisconsin Governor Tommy Thompson. Welcome, gentlemen. It's good to have you here.
Great to be here.
I have a couple of questions, as I mentioned, to start things out. And as I was talking to Scott before our panel started, and he mentioned that a lot of times he goes around speaking to lots of people around the country about education, and the number 1 thing or one of the top things he hears is that people don't know that there's a lot of really good news in education happening. So Scott, I'm going to toss you the first ball, and I'm going to ask you, well, what can you highlight for us? What is the good news? What's the good news in education policy that you're telling people that you think that legislators need to hear?
Well, I think that over the course of the last couple of years, we've had the biggest run of success in the history of the school choice movement. Back in 1990, when I was Tommy Thompson's Chief of Staff 22 years ago, we created the first publicly created private school choice program in modern times. And it then took us 20 years to create the next 19 programs. So at the beginning of this legislative session, there were 20 publicly created private school choice programs in the country. As this legislative session comes to an end, there are 32 publicly created private school choice programs in the country. A more than 50% increase in just one legislative session in the number of private school choice programs around the country. And they're coming in more varieties, they're coming in more different kinds of states, small states, large states, rural states, very urban states. It's been very exciting over the course of the last few years. Today I think there are now 16 states, plus the District of Columbia, that have a private school choice program. Now, 5-6 years ago, the school choice movement was arguing with people that we weren't on the fringe of the education reform movement. No, we really mattered. Things were happening. I think you're hard-pressed now to say that when 1/3 of the nation has a private school choice program, we have entered the mainstream of the education reform debate. And in fact, in this most recent legislative session, 19 different states got a bill through at least one house of the legislature, including places as formidable as New York State, where a bill passed the state Senate. So we are excited about that. We're also excited about the character of the reforms. In the past, people tried to pass little, small programs, and then over time they would increase them to impact more kids. Today, what we're seeing is governors and legislators coming out with big, bold reforms and getting them done. Last year, the supposed year of school choice in 2011, Indiana led the way with a statewide program under the leadership of the governor and a very reform-minded legislature. But very quickly here in 2012, Louisiana passed a program that was statewide. Yeah. Arizona passed a program that was statewide. So we're seeing bigger and bolder programs right out of the box at the start, and we're seeing more bipartisan support. So really the last couple of years have been the biggest amount of success we've ever seen in the school choice movement, let alone some of the progress we've seen with the parent trigger and with other programs.
Yes, I like to tell people before I came to Heartland and focused on education, I was just more in general editing public policy. So I like to say I came to education at the right time because, like you're saying, everything's starting to happen. I didn't have to endure all those years of hoping and waiting and wishing. I actually do have a question. I wanted to also talk about or ask your expertise about whether you think that. So I have a hunch about whether the changes happened this last legislative session, as you said, and is that really the result of representatives getting out there and finally summoning up the political courage to do it, or do you think there is a change among the electorate or the type of representatives that we get? Is that a chicken or the egg question? By which I mean so.
I understand.
Yeah.
So I think that there were really three factors. One, there was a change in representation. Second, there is an ongoing change in public opinion. Okay. And last, there's been a change, I think, in the message that the school choice movement has had. So first of all, the 2010 elections saw a Republican sweep across the country. A lot of reform-minded governors were elected. A lot of chambers went to Republican leadership. Mm-hmm. Chambers where in the past there might have been majority support for a school choice program, but the Democratic leadership was not going to let it come up. So those changes really improved the odds, I think, for the program, for private school choice programs around the country. Secondly, we're seeing in polling that the public is finally losing its patience with the public school system.
Sure.
They have been willing to vote for higher taxes, to vote for a sales tax increase, to vote for whatever, and put more money into the system. But I think increasingly people are coming to the conclusion it's not money that matters. There are other reforms that need to be made. And we've seen that very strongly over the course of the last couple of years. And then last of all, I would say it's been a change in the message. This idea was born out of Milton Friedman's brain some 50 plus years ago. And Mr. Friedman approached this idea of private school choice from the free market perspective.
Yes.
That is through competition, and that you get the greatest possible public good for consumers. And that's a very compelling idea to right-wing geeks like me. However, it's not as strong of an idea with the general public. I mean, I wish the general public got excited about free market economics, but I'm sad sad to say that's not the case. But the great thing about the private school choice idea is that it is both a good idea from a free market economics perspective, but it is also a great idea from the perspective of social justice. Americans deeply believe that education is what helps people get ahead in life. And they believe that every child, no matter where they live, who their parents are, or how much money they have, every child should be able to go to a school that will transform their life. That is a bedrock American principle. And when you combine those two ideas together, you're able to appeal to a much broader audience, and I think have a much more emotionally compelling story than just focusing on the free market economics.
That relates to something I wanted to ask you about, Representative Miller, which is, so we've talked a little bit about the electoral landscape for school choice, and as a representative, I'd like you to bring that home for us. Tell us, well, one of my questions when I think about Texas and school choice is, you've sponsored Texas Taxpayer Savings Grants, which are essentially a voucher program. And can you tell me, Texas does a lot of really conservative free market things, but it doesn't have vouchers. How did Indiana and Louisiana manage to steal a jump on you?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. We're trying to move in that direction. the Taxpayer Savings Grant got more legs than anything we tried there. We were facing like many states, a $15 billion budget shortfall. So we had for public education, we had a defined amount of money and a defined amount of students to spend it on. So our choices were for more funding. We were going to be about $5 billion short. So we could either increase taxes and increase our pile of money, or decrease the number of students we were serving.
Right.
The problem we have in Texas, we're rapidly growing state. We have 1,500 new Texans each day, and in the biennium we gained about 80,000 new students.
Goodness.
So our problem is really not the pile of money we have, but we have too many students for the money we do have.
Sure.
So that's how Taxpayer Savings Grants came in. It gave an incentive for parents to take their children. Would give them 60% of the funds. You take them out of enroll them in private school, and we would the state would retain the other 40%. So if 6% of the students is what other examples would take us up on that, it would have been about $2 billion savings to that. So in this case, it was actually a win for the public schools and for people that want to enroll their children in private schools.
Well, that's true of most school choice programs. Most of them plow money right back into the normal traditional public school system. Isn't that right, Scott?
Yeah, that's right. And so most programs save the state money, and most states choose to reinvest that in public education. The end result is that school choice programs usually increase the amount of money spent per child in the public schools. Sadly enough, that doesn't keep the public school system from claiming that we're stealing their money.
We had a unique situation in Texas. As we were looking at this, we had school superintendents that were actually paying teachers to leave. It wasn't that we had too many teachers. I mean, there was too many students, the amount of money. So that's how we came up with this idea.
And do you think, I know there have been a number of primary, you just had your primary over in Texas. Do you think that given what looks like will be the electoral or the legislative landscape, that you have a better run at the idea this coming session?
Oh, I think much better run this time. We had large turnover after redistricting in the Texas legislature. I think we're going to have close to maybe 40 new members.
Goodness.
We've, of course, certainly the conservatives hold both branches, in the executive branch, the Senate and the House both. So it's something we're certainly we'll keep moving forward. We have the Senate has an education hearing the 24th, and it's going to be about school choice. So we're moving forward with it.
Bruno, I want to ask you about what you're best. I think you're often best on the parent trigger because you have so much passion for the idea. So before we get back in, I want to have the rest of our panel talk about strategy for communicating with voters, for communicating with your fellow legislators to promote school choice ideas. So we'll come back around to that, but before we get there, let's talk about another one of the sort of free market, more democratic ideas that the Heartland Institute is big into, and that's your best one, Bruno. Can you first outline how the parent trigger works? And we've seen actually a surge of support for it over these summer months, as we have seen over the past year for a lot of other school choice legislation. So can you talk about both of those issues? First, just telling people what the concept is, and second of all, why it will help complement a lot of other school choice ideas to giving people more options in education.
Sure. The parent trigger is very simple. The bedrock foundation of it is that it actually empowers parents. And you create a benchmark from a state legislative perspective. You create a benchmark as you define a school as failing. So whatever you define it as, whether it's California's test of academic performance index being 800, below is failing and above is not, or whether you use a federal standard or some kind of hybrid standard, you create a standard that says a school is failing. Then you create a process by which the parents whose children attend that school can initiate a petition to change the governance of that school. The powerful political part of this is that you're going to parents and you're saying, we are giving you the power to change bad schools and change them either through one of 4 different options in California, or you can have different options. So the first thing is creating the process by which the school is failing. The second thing is giving the parents a petition to change it. And then the third thing is, what do you change it to? Problem in California is that they had 2 very, very bureaucratic options, which were transformation and transition or transmogrification. There were 2 T's in there, and they were clearly very much rearranging the deck chairs on the sinking District Titanic. The other benefit was that you could flip it to a charter school, and of course we now know that there are tons of very, very effective charters. You simply pick an effective charter management organization and flip the school into a charter. The other one, which is probably the least politically popular, but it was a very powerful tool, and that is school closure. What Heartland did when we wrote the parent trigger brief is we said, well, hey, why not trigger a voucher? Particularly in many of these urban districts where you do have an infrastructure of private schools, either Catholic or parochial, or down south you have a great infrastructure of private schools. Why not just flip it into a voucher as well? So we didn't really see the parent trigger as an alternative to a voucher. We saw a parent trigger as a political avenue to get more charters and more vouchers and to shut down or change the management of failing schools.
I was actually, as you're talking, thinking about how a lot of school choice options blend into each other. So Pennsylvania just enacted a tax credit scholarship legislation that allows kids from the failing 15%, the state's worst schools on the failing list, kids who attend those schools who have about up to a middle-class family income. The cap is $60,000 plus an extra $12,000 in annual income for each extra child besides one. So it's a pretty high income cap. Those kids can take can have a tax credit scholarship. Businesses donate money to a nonprofit. The nonprofits give the kids scholarships to private schools. So that is, another exit option for kids to leave really terrible schools. So I'm thinking, all these school choice options, there are a lot of mix and match ways. And Pennsylvanians really like the business tax credit because it's private money, because they don't have to restructure the public school system. So I know that different political climates, require different kind of school choice ideas. So what I would like to do, now this is an open question for the gentleman here, is think how do you discern what is a good what it might be a good fit, a legislative fit for advancing school choice, given the climate that you have among your constituents and among your fellow lawmakers that you have to work with?
We usually go into a state and interview lots of policymakers and then try to make a judgment about whether the best way to move forward is with a voucher program, where the money that the state would have invested in the child at their public school follows the child to the school of their parents' choice, or whether we should use the scholarship tax credit model that you were just talking about in Pennsylvania, where individuals contribute to a charitable scholarship organization and get a tax credit that's worth all or nearly all of their contribution. In turn, those groups provide scholarships to kids. Or now we're even seeing new things like the Education Savings Account program.
Right.
In Arizona, which a lot of people think is Vouchers 2.0. Yeah. This is a program where a parent who wants to have a different option than their local public school will receive 80% of the money that would have been spent on their child's behalf at the public school. It'll be placed into a bank account that the parent controls, and the parent goes out and buys the education they think is right for their child, whether it's at a private school, whether it's online, whether it's
they can mix and match
textbooks,
between all those ideas,
whether they're teaching them at home, all those things, and allowing you to mix and match all those so the parents can customize the education to meet the needs of their child. So we're seeing a lot of things. That's the great thing about America, with 50 different states and all of them having slightly different politics and smart legislators coming up with new ideas. That's really what we've seen. We try to go as far as we can for the biggest, largest possible program that can pass, because having a big program that can't pass doesn't help a single child.
Right.
So in some states we find it's a voucher program. In other states we've found, no, that's not likely to work with the state's constitution or with the state's politics, and so we'll go with the scholarship tax credit program. In general, the scholarship tax credit programs have slightly larger support among Democrats than voucher programs, but it's not always the case. In Louisiana, Democrats were crucial to the passage of that program.
Sure. How about with you? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, Jill, and I'm the non-legislator. We've got a former legislator and a sitting legislator. I've not sat in a legislature. But from the perspective of what you're saying about how all of these programs seem to bleed into each other, they have one thing in common. And whether it's starting a charter school or whether it's a voucher, or a savings grant, or a tuition tax credit, and that is that the money follows the child. So where we redo all the poll testing on whether voucher is the right word or whether a Texas savings grant is the right word. The fact of the matter is, what I find works in the rooms that I've talked to, and not all of them are free market Tea Party folks, but they're people who actually have tough questions for school choice supporters, is the 30-second elevator close. That basically says that the existing district system is failing to educate our children at too high a cost, and that the way to fix that is to dismantle the district system by having the money follow the child to a vast new array of education service providers. And then you throw in the word independent education service providers. And this will get you through most tough questions from most people, because everybody wants the money to follow the child. Everybody wants independent education options. So that, and all of them bleed in together that way. And that way you can start selling and promoting the idea where the money follows the child to better schools. And that, I think, most people buy, and as Scott has said, they're becoming very, very skeptical of the district system.
Another way of saying that is to ask people, do you think the public investment in education should be made in the child or in the system? Should we be taking your tax dollars to invest in the kid's future or in the system's future? And if you focus on that, I think it really, very few people raise their hand for the system.
Well, I think, and I'll take a little different angle, but I think to get an idea like taxpayer savings grants or parent trigger, something like this through, it's a political thing. It really needs to start at the local grassroots level, at your county conventions and at your state platform. It needs to be, you know, the political machine needs to be behind it, and the legislators like myself, we need to hear from constituents that they want it, they demand it, parents need this. It's something that they're behind, and much easier to pass than just some individual, you know, walking in, or a specific lobby group walking in. But when the people demand it, the legislature will pass it. So I think it should not overlook the grassroots effort in your community or in your state to get behind something like this. Very important.
I think one of the things that when I go around and talk to people, the number one surprising statistic for people is how much that your state, or I usually use the average U.S. figure, spends per child on education. So the average U.S. figure, which doesn't include a lot of spending such as debt outlays or capital improvements, is around $12,000. In some states, I think it's New York, goes up to around $22,000 per child. You know, of course, Utah is the lowest. They have around almost $7,000, about $6,700. So the number one thing, though, you know, because people, you know, often think, oh, sure, you know, those poor kids, they need an education, but when they think $12,000, holy cow, I could take my child, you know, to the best private school in the area for that and have some money left over. You know, most cities, except if you're in a really big city, then people start thinking, okay, what are they doing with that money? Where is that money all going? And then that's where you can start to have a conversation about how well, you know, is this money being spent? How well, you know, should we compensate teachers, or, you know, in what form should we do that? And then you can start the point of comparison for people to be thinking about what's the best way to be using the taxpayer dollars that's really hard for them to give up in an economy like we have right now. We're going to, before we open up the panel for some questions from the audience, do any of you gentlemen have some things that you wanted to think about or wanted to talk about, that a sort of tack that you didn't have a chance to opine about yet?
You had said you were going to ask us about possibly about communicating and making the argument for school choice. And the one thing I would say about that is that I think the instinct of school choice supporters is to make their case based upon the facts and logic.
Yes.
But this is the world of politics, and the facts and logic don't get you 50%. They get you somewhere in the 40s. Emotion is what wins in politics. Ronald Reagan did not spend a lot of time walking people through statistics when he made the argument for defeating the Soviet Union, restoring the American economy. He made his argument based upon a compelling series of stories. He was a great storyteller. Bill Clinton, when he was at the top of his game, Bill Clinton was a storyteller. You would ask him about his complicated health care proposal, he would bite his lip and talk about a young mom he'd met in Iowa who had to go back to work because her husband lost his health insurance, right? And how could you be against that? So our opponents make emotional arguments, and we tend to respond with facts and figures and logic, and we need to become good storytellers and to give them strong, emotionally compelling arguments.
I was just thinking when you said that Hard luck stories make really bad case law, but it sounds like hard luck stories make really great selling material.
They do in the legislature. A lot of bad law and good law is made based upon a single instance that becomes publicized.
All right, with that, John, are you wandering around with the microphone? All right, then we're going to open up the floor for questions from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you for this panel, especially. I'm the minority leader in the Assembly in Nevada. I'd like to ask the Texas representative there. You talked about the politics of it, and while you enjoy majorities that we don't quite have, you obviously have won some Democrats over, and I especially like that, how it's a win for public schools. Could you or whoever mentioned about the 60-40 split, because that seems like something that's more palatable to folks on the other side of that issue.
Well, being in the legislature, you understand that it's very hard to pass any legislation if there's winners and losers. Those that, where there's winners and winners, those are much easier to pass. And if you take a look, and there's some information on Taxpayer Savings Grant, it is actually a win for the public school system, and for the parents that want to enroll their kids in the private school. So that's what makes it unique, and that's what makes it a lot easier to pass and more palatable. You get a lot of pushbacks from the teachers groups and the teachers unions. You know the story. We've all had it and heard it and have to fight that. But yeah, it makes it a lot easier when actually public education can be a winner at the same time.
And really quickly, just follow up on that. The mechanics are actually pretty simple, and quite frankly, they work very well in Texas based on the way Texas has its education funding through all the series of lawsuits, although you're now in the middle of a fifth suit that's moving forward. But the basic rule on this is that if you take the state's portion of funding, so to speak, and you split that 60-40, when the 60% leaves and follows the child to the private school system, you've got this pool of 40% left over. So the way to talk to the citizens about that is to say this leaves more money inside the system for the children who are left there. So the per-pupil spending for the children that are inside the public system goes up, while at the same time creating a vast new avenue for choice. The really powerful thing about the Texas legislation was that it was unrestricted. It was completely unrestricted for poverty or anything like that. If you wanted to leave the system and you were willing to take 60% of the $8,800, you could go. And that would have been the first universal system. And we're still hoping and praying for that to happen eventually somewhere, hopefully Texas.
There was some stipulations on it. You couldn't use it to go to a charter school. You couldn't let, if you're already in a private school, you were ineligible. So you had to be enrolled in a public school, withdraw, and enter into a private school. And it was actually the lesser of the 60% or the cost of tuition. The lesser of the two.
We have a paper at the American Federation for Children for both voucher programs and scholarship tax credit programs, simple two-pager for legislators that shows you how to make sure that each of these programs actually saves the taxpayers money in your state. And if you can find it on our website, and if you can't, give me your card and I'll make sure we send you one.
I have one last cap on that, which is that nearly all of the larger school choice programs that are passed use the state funds for it. They can't, get their hands on district funds usually unless it's redistribution funds. That's why all school choice programs save money, is because all of that local money that stays there originally is still staying there for a fewer number of students. And so that's, a very standard school choice mechanism.
Yes, Brad Montel from Kentucky, and a follow-up to this discussion. Representative, I'm curious, as I read the definition of an eligible student, and it was just mentioned, there is no language about any type of income level. And one of the challenges that we seem to have in bringing forth, even with charter schools, we're one of the 9 states that still don't enjoy charter schools. Wow. Did you hear the objection that you're going to just be taking the best students out of the public schools now? They're going to flee to the private schools and leave the rest in our public schools? Was that an objection that you had to overcome?
Oh, that objection plus many others. The great thing about it is it creates competition. And where this is taking place in other states, the academic level of the public school rises, the academic level achievement of the private school rises. There becomes competition for the better teachers, so teachers' salaries also rise. You know, the demand for better teachers drives that up. So basically, it's the you know, competition drives the boat and lifts all boats. So that argument's pretty easy to shoot down. When you have a limited voucher program, you know, you have a program that's only available for a certain number of people, but this one is unlimited. Any parent anywhere, not just failing school. So most of the time, those, you know, they're afraid that they're going to lose their star quarterback or something like that. That just doesn't happen. That's not the people that want out. Those people are basically happy with their public schools.
Sure comes up a lot in debate, though, doesn't it?
I have something to add, which is that there have actually been some recent studies on, especially charter schools, whether charter schools have more minority students, more disabled students, etc. And one of the findings of those is that, first of all, charter and private schools tend to under-identify. Public schools, traditional public schools, will label many more children special needs than private and charter schools. So because, well, the traditional public schools get more money for those, and the public and the private and charter schools don't, and they also prefer, you know, what they call mainstreaming, keeping those kids in the classroom, helping them work through a lot of, you know, the lesser learning disabilities. The nice benefit about charter schools is they can specialize. So there are charter schools specifically for disabled students. There are charters specifically for students that are autistic, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lady, John. Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm Hal Wick from South Dakota again, and I hate to take too much time, but in our state, we have two of the lowest cost school districts in my district. And one spends just over $6,500, one spends just under $7,000. We have the best non-public school system that has by far the best grades, the best results, 85% of the kids going to college, and they spend about $6,500. Our worst school is at $23,000 plus, and it's the worst school system in the state. But we have one serious problem. We have a Blaine Amendment. 37 states, I think, have it. We have one of the worst. And what we need to know is which is best, to go after the Blaine Amendment and get rid of it by changing our Constitution, or challenge it, and where's the help come from to pay the cost, the court costs, the legal fees, if we fight it by passing a bill and then having to fight it in courts.
Well, first of all, you have a law firm already to help you with this. They're willing to help you for free. The Institute for Justice in Washington, D.C. is the school choice community's law firm. They're a public interest law firm. They'll help you. They actually have a guide for all 50 states, and it has recommendations about what kind of school choice legislation makes the most sense in your state. There are only 2 states in which they believe you couldn't pass some sort of private school choice legislation. Wisconsin has a Blaine Amendment. In fact, most of the states with private school choice programs have a Blaine Amendment. The question is, how have your courts historically interpreted that Blaine Amendment? What other programs have they looked at in the past? College scholarships, aid to preschool, all those sort of things from the state. A lot of times you're able to go to a religious school for college on a state grant. A lot of people are able to go to a lot of the 70% of preschools in America are private, not public, and the money that comes from the state and federal government that goes to them often goes to religious preschools. So if you look, they got a page for South Dakota, and it'll tell you whether or not they think it would make the most sense to do a scholarship tax credit program like your neighbor next door, Iowa, which has a Blaine Amendment, or whether you should do one more like those of us in Wisconsin, a voucher program.
And just adding to that quickly, probably the fastest and easiest way to craft something that gets around the Blaine Amendment is a tax, it would be a tuition tax credit of some sort, a scholarship tax credit. The other thing that would be possible, and this works very well from a political perspective as well, depending on how your state spending breaks down, is to allow some kind of local property tax credit for people who decide they want to leave the public system, and they get the portion from their property taxes refunded, becomes very politically popular and gets you past most Blaine language. For all the rest of you in the room, assuming you can pull it off, assuming you can get the signatures, The Blaine Amendment and that language is a stain on the United States of America. And if we can't get a Supreme Court to overturn it based on a wide variety of grounds, like the 14th Amendment, then I'd encourage all of you, just from the standpoint of doing what's right, to do everything you can to get Blaine Amendment taken out of your Constitution. It just doesn't belong there.
I have I'll be right there with you, ma'am. In case anyone doesn't know what a Blaine Amendment is, that is basically an amendment in the state constitution. They were erected out of anti-Catholic sentiment because people didn't want people going to Catholic schools back when Catholics were strange and unusual in the United States. And they prohibit state funds from going to religious schools. Okay, go ahead.
Let me just make one comment before we go to another question. Just to help you guys and gals out there that are having to argue for vouchers or taxpayer savings grants. When you get in an argument with a teacher and educator, I always like to bring up the subject because they never think about this. I said, did you go to college? Oh, yeah. Did you have any financial assistance? Yeah, I did. Did you get a Pell Grant? Oh, yeah, I got a Pell Grant. I got a tuition equalization grant. I said, well, you know what? Those are voucher programs. We've had voucher in the higher ed for years, for the last 50 years in the United States or in Texas. So it didn't ruin our universities. It hadn't hurt them. They seem to be doing fine, but we give out vouchers. I guess probably every state utilizes as a voucher program. It just happens to be in higher ed. There you go. Yeah. It's a voucher. It's government money. Go to whatever school you want. Perfect.
My name's Chris Hansen. I'm a legislator from Montana. We don't have any school choice at all of any kind yet either.
I think you have a privately sponsored school choice program that I just heard about recently. It's a wealthy gentleman.
We just got ACE. Yeah. ACE is coming, yes. Yeah. On the funding, on the taxpayer savings grants or the vouchers or whatever, I don't know about Texas or not, but when you're talking about the state funding, is Texas, or do you guys know how many other states are fully state-funded education, or is it broken down between state and local? Because with Montana, a huge proportion of our education funding comes from the locals, which then if you start talking about the state portion and a portion of the state portion, the vouchers start to get a whole lot smaller and it doesn't do anything at the local level. So is anybody addressing that piece?
I can specifically speak to Illinois, but it's probably very, very similar in many states, if not most states. In Illinois, they always talk about the local dollar, when in fact the local dollar, the local property tax for schools here in Illinois is actually a state authorized tax on a local asset. So when everybody sits there and says, well, Illinois is 48th in funding, that's actually not true. Our property taxes are very, very high here, and it is state money. So in a lot of these situations, and Texas has a slightly different aspect of that Sid's probably better at talking about with the way that they've had their state funding, but essentially, if it's with many, many states, it's really state money that authorizes this. I've also, at the same time, tried to tell everybody I talk to that the three sources of funding, some federal for poverty programs and the big cities, along with the state portion of the state and portion of local, this is, in my opinion, one of the key factors we have to go after, because they use the state and local argument against vouchers. And any time you can either say this is all state money, as the local tax is here in Illinois, the legislature in Illinois could zero out the property tax for education tomorrow if they wanted to. They don't like to tell people that, but they could. And it's probably very similar in a lot of states, but that back and forth funding between state and local money is one of their top excuses to run down voucher programs. So anything you can do to clarify that is very helpful. And then the other thing, and like I said, this is just another idea that I've tried to throw out there, is that if you can get a voucher or a tax credit through a property tax abatement for choosing a private school, it circumvents most Blaine problems, and it would be considered by most people to be a huge tax benefit because they get to lop off a good chunk of their property tax if they were able to do it.
I have two suggestions for resources for you. The first one is to look at Douglas County, Colorado, which created its own voucher program through a charter school mechanism. And the second one is, I was talking recently with the president of the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, and they have looked at the local property tax, relation to trying to get school choice all the way through, including all the local money. So that is a place that I would call up and talk to, because I haven't seen any studies from them related to it, but he said that they've thought about it. So I would, expect there to be some, good information for you there.
So we got one final question.
Have any of you looked at or have any resources for us to get around the Blaine Amendment by paying the parents directly in something that is guaranteed to go to education, whether it would be a check that could only be, that had to be endorsed by a school or something like that? I love the property tax issue, but are there other ideas out there that would work?
Well, that's exactly how most voucher programs work, and that's why even Wisconsin, a state with a Blaine Amendment, has a voucher program that was found constitutional by by the state Supreme Court. The same is true in Ohio, where the program was found constitutional. The way it works in a voucher program, the way they usually do it, is the state sends a check to the parents of Parker Jensen, and they send the check to for $4,800 or $6,400 to St. Mary's Academy in Burlington. The parent then comes into the school, signs the back of the check over to the school. That way the state knows the money got spent on education, but the check went to the parents, and therefore the state was not sponsoring a religious organization. The state was investing in the parent and that family for education for the child, and the parent made the decision about where they were going to spend that money. So that's the way most voucher programs work, and that's why even in many states with Blaine amendments, they're able to get around that. Again, it has a lot to do with previous arguments. In the case of Montana, you've already gotten a scholarship tax credit program, I know, out of the Senate, Senate committee there, and I think that that's an approach that makes some sense in a state like Montana as well, especially with all the mineral revenues.
And I'd just like to jump in. One of the other, and this is just, I mean, as Jill pointed out, there's so many great ideas here, and they kind of all do blend into each other, just in terms of creating more education options. One of the biggest benefits of if you combine the taxpayer savings grants with a education savings account idea, you can basically go to parents and say, if you're willing to avail yourself of less money, and this is exactly how Texas worded their law, and it was brilliant in my opinion. If you're willing to if you're willing to take less money from the state will reward you by giving you this $5,800 benefit directly to you. But if you were to take an education savings account idea and say, if you're willing to take less than the $11,000 they're wasting on bureaucracy, and instead take $8,000 for a savings account that you can use for education options, the number of parents who would jump at that and literally start immediately circumventing a lot of the pro-district, pro-bureaucracy ideas it would be pretty large. It's a great way to sell it.
This is just what they did in Arizona.
Right.
And next year, not this school year, but the year after will be the first year they've had it. We'll see if parents jump at it. I hope that they do. But they're able to, if they're smart shoppers and they don't have to spend all the money the state gave them in that year for their child's education and get to roll it over for their kids' college education. I think that's a pretty high incentive for parents to be smart shoppers, and something very attractive to all of us parents who are trying to save for college right now.
All right, gentlemen, we're at the end of our time. I will be floating around in the hallways. I saw a couple of other hands. If anyone wants to nab me, I'm happy to help you, and so is the rest of Heartland staff. Thank you for paying attention, and thank you for being here.